getting into what it is that they want to do. Oh, maybe you could look at my calculations and, and and Chakotay says something about he didn't do very good in one of those classes. It's okay, man. We get it.
But, you really see how, I'm just going to go with it here, Space Red is absolutely stroking Chakotay's ego, like really trying to get him on board with the plan, right? Because he's like, you failed a class? Well, you can't teach certain things. You have a natural instinct. And it's like, yeah, he's really flattering him. And Chakotay's eating it up. He really is.
Tom even calls him out on it later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you almost think like, oh, is Chakotay playing the long game here? Like he's going to do a double cross? And no, he genuinely is going to try to make this work.
Yeah, probably waits too long for that, but it all works out in the end. Spoilers.
What?
What? So we go back to Voyager, and in the mess hall, I think, everything's in shambles, so it's kind of hard to tell. The remaining main cast, as I say, sits around sharing a drink that Neelix has made with his spices in it, and this is where Seven tells them that it's awful. Janeway's briefing them on what she wants to do, how she wants to proceed. She wants to leave the nebula, figure out how to get their people back and get to home, and she has all these plans. Seven's kind of like, I don't think that'll work. Let's not do that. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's exactly how 7 of 9 talks. She's like, nah. That's it. They all leave, and we see 7 and Novak walking out, and he's like, that was probably kind of rude to say that to the captain, because the captain's always right, even when she's wrong, is basically what he tells 7. And 7 is so confused because everybody's been trying to get her to think more for herself, because she always thought as part of the collective, and now she's being more human, so communicate, think for yourself, do all this stuff, and then now she's not supposed to because the captain's always right. Which, let me say this. Whenever you go with this whole, the captain's always right, oh, your boss is always right kind of stuff, that's what can get you into trouble. I had a boss who tried to get me to lie about something once, and I was like, no, it's not happening.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I think in a situation like this, I get it, because they're on the ship and there's other people and there's a chain of command and all that. But yeah, this is another great scene between 7 and Tuvok, where they're having this great conversation that they have, again showing how she's really trying to grasp like what it means to be an individual person, and how she struggles with finding the right balance with that.
And once again, this is a scene where I feel like this is something that would have happened 2 weeks into the journey, where more people are questioning captain's orders, and to think about that they've come 3 years without somebody just speaking up and saying, hey, I disagree with what you're doing, when the reality of the entire premise of the show is pretty much within the first couple of weeks, people are going to lose their mind and say, hey, we're stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with no chance to get home. I'm going to speak up, screw chain of command and all that. So once again, going back to the reason I picked this episode, I just see elements in these 2 episodes that I think that's really close to what life would have been like out there without the sensationalized, you know what I mean? So
to this, back to just this episode in general, like Anorax's crew has been on there with him for 200 years before anybody spoke up.
I mean, that's a very good point.
Who knows? These space people, they're crazy. All right, so we go back to Krenim ship. It's day 161. Chakotay is showing Anorax this comet, and he says this is the reason he thinks Voyager went off into Krenim space. So they run the simulation to see what would happen if they, shoot it with the time ray. And there's all these civilizations vanish. They're, so it's kind of like sort of genocide, but also sort of like they never existed since it's the time travel thing. But, that's not really something that Chakotay really wants to do. So oddly enough, Anorax is kind of like, now you just need to make sure you know what you're doing here. I've done this before, kind of thing. Like he really cares about who disappears or not. He's only waiting for someone to appear. And then he sort of talks about how when he built this ship to defeat their enemy, their people got some sort of disease from, I guess, the enemy. And unfortunately, when their enemy was destroyed, so was the antibody that would have been able to heal his people. So, it's like they died anyway. And so this, they've tried to fix it, and anyway, this is how he's gotten into this like time loop, which I know that's not what a time loop is, but that's fine.
This is
it's a time cycle. I don't know. I want to call it something.
It's a time mix-up? It's mix-up time. I don't know. I actually really, really like this whole exposition scene a lot because they eliminate their greatest enemy, right? And thinking that this is going to like help their species and make them all powerful and like on top. And then come to find out that these two species probably needed each other way more than they would like to admit because of this antibody that had been introduced into the Krenim genome, and who knows how far back in the past that happened. And I really, really think that this is actually quite interesting to kind of show like how interconnected people are. Like even in the 24th century, even on different planets and different civilizations, people are still incredibly interconnected. And if you eliminate one, you could end up eliminating a whole bunch more. And I don't know, like this just really resonates with me as like a really interesting thing that happened.
Rebecca, this is very Star Trek-y, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what this whole thing is all about. Inclusion and relevance of everybody, and even the smallest, insignificant, life form or planet or something has a major impact on your own, so it's just making you question your prejudices and looking at your enemy as somebody that doesn't necessarily have to be your enemy, because in the end, you most likely need that person. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So. And we've seen that like through the history of Star Trek. Like we've seen shows that have explored, especially like with Discovery, the war between the Klingons and the Federation. Then we've seen how in the original series there's like the neutral zone between us and them. But then by the time we get to Next Generation, there are allies. We've got a Klingon serving on the Enterprise, and then with Deep Space Nine, we saw how the Klingons and the Federation really, fought side by side against the Dominion. So, I mean, we've seen that happen. We've seen how people have learned to overcome their differences in order to be stronger together. And I do love that about Star Trek. I think it's why I love it so much is because it's like in the future, it means that we got it right. In the future, we figured it out, how to put everything to the side and how to coexist peacefully. And it gives me hope that we'll get there one day, like that we will figure it out and we will make it better. Like that's what I love about Star Trek.
And you see things like that today, like shows interjecting this theme. Like, you're always talking about She-Ra on another podcast, and it's no secret that you love the She-Ra, the Princess of Power. And
we could talk about She-Ra all the time.
We could.
And obviously that show, even though I haven't seen it yet, I mean, your explanations and enthusiasm about it has really led me to believe that the show is all about inclusion. And you see themes like that in shows over the last 5 or 6 years. Particularly on streaming services when they can just pretty much do whatever they want. Network television obviously has a long way to come when it comes to that. But when you see that themes, this is the mid-90s. You know what I mean? And Star Trek wasn't afraid. And even as early as the original series, Star Trek was not afraid to just insert a little bit of a message into this sci-fi fantasy pure entertainment show. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it.
And also, everybody should watch She-Ra and the Princesses of Power because it's an amazing show on Netflix.
Yeah, it's great.
Do you guys do a podcast about that show too, or no?
No, it's over, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't.
I know. We are reviewing a show from the 90s, so right now. So
it's true. That's true.
Could work.
In no particular order, too.
Indeed.
So another little bit of stuff that they could have shown if they did this as a whole season arc is Anorax and Chakotay go off to see the temporal core. It's like they didn't even need to put that line in there. Oh, I'll show you the temporal core. It's like you could have just gone to back to Voyager here in the next scene. I want to see the temporal core. I want to see, what it looks like, what it does, whatever. So Voyager, we see, is caught in a micro meteor storm, and I just assume that just means because they're small, but it just seems weird, because you just think of meteors as being like large rocks, and so micro just seems, I don't know, it seems like almost a juxtaposition to me, but not quite. Janeway goes to level 4, I think, because she wants to manually run the deflector controls. This level is not safe for people. Nobody's down there. She gets down there. There's a fire. So she picks up some scrap to use as a shield and goes in to manually fix this. Everybody's on the bridge and they're just like, oh, well, okay, they're done. They're fixed. Okay. It's good. And we see, they're trying to call back to her to make sure she's okay. We see her laying on the floor. Her face is burned. Then we have the doctor is talking to her in the mess hall triage, and he informs her that he can't fix her scars because they don't have a dermal regenerator. They're trying to save all of their, replications and all that kind of stuff for very specific needs. So, sorry, you're gonna have scars, which they're battle scars, I'll wear them proudly kind of thing. He tells her that she got 3rd-degree burns over 60% of her body, and so one of her arms and her face for sure is gonna have these scars and stuff on them. He tries to get her to stay there. Of course, Janeway does not want to stay there in her own fashion. She's like, I gotta get back to work, see ya. And he's like, you have PTSD. You should stay here because you need to not deal with all that right now. Because I don't care if you feel fine, like mentally you need to rest. And they sort of argue about it. He threatens to relieve her of duty. So then she threatens to deactivate him. It's like, oh man. Because, she's like on this sort of power trip at this moment. And so whenever she tries to leave, he's like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I relieve you of your current command or whatever. And she's just like, there's not enough people here. They need me. I mean, what are you going to do to me? We need to get out of this. So, he mentions that he's got to put it in his report. And she's like, if we get home, I'll gladly take that court-martial. That's fine. I will deal with it. Because we will be home.
Yeah, sitting in a courtroom and air conditioned and fully bathed and cleaned up and safe and secure on Earth, that's not much of a threat at that point.
No, not really. So I don't really blame her at that point. She goes back to work, and because they have to save on the replicators, instead of having a new uniform jacket, she's walking around in her tank top. With her little communicator on it. And she's with Neelix, and they're taking readings like in the corridors, and they get to Chakotay's quarters, and they're walking around taking readings, and she finds that watch that he had replicated her for her birthday, and she's just like, he didn't follow orders. And, and she picks it up and she sort of looks at it, and then she hangs